Video Targaryen Lore. Aegon the Conqueror's Secret Vision. Consolidation of the Realm and Winter's Burden, Part 2 15th. The Crown's Burden, Consolidation, and Sacrifice. He united Westeros with fire and blood. But after the conquest, Aegon's true battle began. Do you know how the Conqueror forged laws, roads, and an army for a winter that was yet to come, and why the shadow of prophecy never left him? Prepare to unravel the secret burden of the king who built an empire not for glory, but for a desperate mission of salvation. After the thunderous echoes of the conquest faded across the valleys and mountains of Westeros, and the last enemy sword was bent in submission, Aegon I Targaryen faced a challenge even greater than war itself: governance. Uniting 7 kingdoms under a single crown was a monumental feat, but transforming them into a single cohesive entity, capable of withstanding an existential threat, was his true mission. History would remember him as the conqueror. But Aegon saw himself as the preparer, the architect of a shield against darkness. His secret vision of the long night, the terror of the White Walkers, and the eternal cold, did not disappear with victory. On the contrary, it intensified, becoming the primary driving force behind every post-conquest action. Every decree, every construction, every alliance was filtered through the lens of this icy prophecy. Aegon could not afford idleness or complacency. Time was an enemy as relentless as the very darkness that would come from the north. The vast continent of Westeros was a mosaic of cultures, laws, and resentments. The north, with its old gods and austere people. The Vale, with its impregnable mountains and pride. The Riverlands, once under the dominion of the Iron Kings, now divided and seeking new direction. The Westerlands, with their wealth, and the Reach, with its fertility, both newly subdued. The Stormlands, with their contained fury, and Dorne, stubbornly independent. Integrating these diverse factions into a single nation would require a combination of force, wisdom, and meticulous planning that few kings could conceive. The task was colossal, but the purpose even greater. The first and most visible manifestation of Aegon's vision for a unified realm was the creation of King's Landing, the new capital. From a simple, temporary fortification, the Egenfurt emerged, a vibrant city, the administrative and political heart of Westeros. King's Landing was not just a convenient choice. It was a powerful symbol of centralization, a focal point for the new realm. Its strategic location, bathed by Blackwater Bay, facilitated trade and communication, essential for the cohesion of a vast empire. Besides building a new capital, Aegon embarked on an ambitious infrastructure project aimed at weaving the realm into a single network. The Kingsroad, the Royal Road, was a monumental undertaking that connected north to south, facilitating the transport of goods, the circulation of information, and, crucially, the rapid mobilization of armies in case of need. This road network was vital not only for the realm's prosperity, but for its ability to respond to the long night. Every brick, every road, every oath was an investment in the future, a preparation for the final war against darkness. Aegon also dedicated himself to unifying the realm's laws and currency, replacing the myriad of local customs and regional edicts with a more consistent legal code. Known as the King's Peace, brought a new era of stability and predictability. Currency was standardized, facilitating trade and strengthening the economy. These acts were not mere governmental adjustments. They were strategic moves to strengthen Westeros' cohesion, making it a resilient entity, capable of withstanding the approaching threat. Aegon's vision for the future of Westeros was not limited to laws and councils. It extended to robust military preparation. He knew that when the long night came, dragons would be essential, but an army of men and a naval fleet would be equally crucial. The unification of the realm allowed Aegon to mobilize resources and forces in a way Westeros had never seen. He encouraged the construction and strengthening of castles and fortifications throughout the realm, especially on borders and at strategic points. These strongholds were not only for defense against human enemies, but also as bastions against the supernatural threat. The royal fleet, though still developing, began to be built, aiming to control sea routes and ensure transport capacity and coastal defense. Furthermore, Aegon promoted military training and army organization. He knew that, in the future, Westeros would need experienced warriors and capable commanders. He maintained a Targaryen fighting force in King's Landing, ready to bait quickly, mobilized. Discipline and coordination among the forces of the different kingdoms, which once warred among themselves, became a priority. All this was done with the long night in mind, an investment in the future few understood. Aegon's policy towards the newly subdued lords was a delicate balance. Between the relentless force of conquest and pragmatic clemency, he did not seek total annihilation, but integration. Houses that bent the knee in time retained their lands, castles, and titles, though they now owed allegiance to the Iron Throne. This policy of rewarding peaceful submission helped build a broader base of support and reduced the potential for prolonged rebellions, which was essential to keep the realm strong for the long night. The queens, Visenya and Rhaenys, played crucial roles in this balancing act. Visenya, with her severity and the implicit threat of vigor, ensured that obedience was unquestionable. She was the one who severely punished those who dared to defy, showing that Aegon's law was to be respected. Rhaenys, with her grace and diplomacy, was the softer side of the conquest, persuading lords with promises of peace and prosperity. Together, they were the stick and the carrot, force and persuasion, working to integrate the realm effectively. However, Aegon's clemency had its limits. Those who resisted to the end, like Harren the Black of Harrenhal, or the Dornish lords who refused to submit, faced total annihilation. Their castles were burned, their lineages, at times, extinguished. These acts of brutality, though tragic, served as a grim reminder of the ultimate consequence of opposing the Iron Throne. They were lessons etched into Westeros' memory, designed to discourage future insurrections and ensure the unity necessary for the end Aegon feared. The burden of Aegon's vision was a secret he carried in great solitude. He knew the truth about the long night, about the White Walkers, about the urgency of preparing Westeros, but he could not openly share this terrible truth with all his lords or with the people. Fear and disbelief could lead to chaos or to greater resistance to his unification. He had to be the villain to some, the tyrant to others, all for the greater good. Aegon accepted the hatred and distrust that his conquering actions might generate, knowing that history would judge him by his means, but that Westeros' future would depend on his ends. His solitude on the Iron Throne, cut by its blades, was a physical and psychological symbol of his personal burden. Every cut was a reminder of the pain he endured to unite the realm, a silent echo of the threat he saw. He was the conqueror in public, the powerful and resolute king. But in private, he was the burdened visionary, the man who saw the shadow of winter, where others saw only the earthly disputes of lords and peasants. His subtle melancholy was the price of his secret knowledge. He lived with the certainty that the final war would come, and that his legacy would be defined not only by his conquest, but by his ability to prepare a realm to face it, a burden that would shape the very foundation of his dynasty. The council in constant vigilance. With the realm unified and the capital established, Aegon Targaryen knew that Westeros' true strength lay not only in its dragons, but in the wisdom of its counselors and constant vigilance against internal and external threats. The shadow of the long night demanded efficient governance and an information network that could detect any fragility. After the conquest, Aegon I understood that ruling such a vast and diverse continent would require more than just the brute force of his dragons. He needed sharp minds, loyalty, and a structure that could manage the realm's day-to-day affairs. while also preparing it for the greater threat. Thus, Aegon established the Small Council, a body of elite advisors who would assist him in governing Westeros. This council was not just a group of nobles. It was a careful selection of individuals with specific skills, many of them former adversaries, who had bent the knee and proven their competence. The inclusion of ex-adversaries in the council was a shrewd move by Aegon to integrate the old houses into the new Targaryen system, transforming potential centers of resistance into pillars of support. Trust was a rare commodity, but Aegon was pragmatic and knew how to recognize talent wherever he found it. The offices of the Small Council were strategically defined to cover all vital areas of governance. The Master of Coin, for finances. The Master of Laws, for justice. The Master of Ships, for the naval fleet. The Master of Whispers, for intelligence. And the Grand Maester, for knowledge and health. Each of these positions was crucial for the realm's stability and, by extension, for its preparation against the long night. Aegon knew that a well-administered realm was a strong realm. Among the members of the Small Council, the Master of Whispers was, perhaps, the most vital to Aegon's secret vision. This office, dedicated to information gathering and espionage, was the king's eye and ear throughout the realm. Aegon understood that, to maintain unity and foresee threats, he needed an information network that went beyond official reports. Aegon's first Master of Whispers was a mysterious and effective individual, whose exact identity and methods were shrouded in secrecy. This network of spies and informants extended throughout Westeros, from the bustling ports of Old Town to the isolated strongholds of the north. No whisper, no conspiracy, no discontent went unnoticed. This intelligence was used not only to crush nascent rebellions, but also to identify weaknesses in the realm that could be exploited by the greater threat. Aegon used the Master's intelligence to ensure that the imposed peace was maintained, even if by force. He knew that any internal division would be an open door to the White Walkers. Constant vigilance was key to stability, and stability was key to survival. Aegon's spy network was a grim reminder that, even in times of peace, the king was always on guard, always prepared for the worst. Aegon's vision for the future of Westeros was not limited to laws and councils. It extended to robust military preparation. He knew that, when the long night came, dragons would be essential, but an army of men and a naval fleet would be equally crucial. The unification of the realm allowed Aegon to mobilize resources and forces in a way Westeros had never seen. He encouraged the construction and strengthening of castles and fortifications throughout the realm, especially on borders and at strategic points. These strongholds were not only for defense against human enemies, but also as bastions against the supernatural threat. The royal fleet, though still developing, began to be built, aiming to control sea routes and ensure transport capacity and coastal defense. Furthermore, Aegon promoted military training and army organization. He knew that, in the future, Westeros would need experienced warriors and capable commanders. He maintained a Targaryen fighting force in King's Landing, ready to be quickly mobilized. Discipline and coordination among the forces of the different kingdoms, which once warred among themselves, became a priority. All this was done with the long night in mind, an investment in the future few understood. Aegon's reign was a period of transition and consolidation, but also one of profound solitude for the king. He ruled with a vision few shared, a burden that compelled him to make difficult and, at times, unpopular decisions. The shadow of prophecy accompanied him every step of the way, every decree. He knew he would not live to see the final battle against the long night. His mission was to prepare the ground, to build the foundations so that his descendants could face the threat. The Iron Throne, forged from the swords of his enemies, was not just the symbol of his power, but a constant reminder of his responsibility. The blades that cut him were an echo of the pain he endured to unite the realm, a symbol of his personal sacrifice for a greater good. Aegon left a legacy of a unified realm, with a solid government structure and an infrastructure that would facilitate defense. He also left a secret, the Long Night Prophecy, which would be passed on to his heirs. The success of his dynasty and the destiny of Westeros would depend on how his successors interpreted and acted upon this dangerous inheritance. The seed of preparation had been planted, but the future of the tree was still uncertain. The fragile link, transmitting the prophecy to heirs. Aegon I had built a realm to withstand a shadow, but the true test of his secret vision lay not just in the strength of walls or the wisdom of laws. It lay in transmitting that truth to his heirs, those who would carry the burden of the crown and the responsibility of prophecy. However, the most vital, terrifying knowledge that would shape Westeros' destiny would prove to be the hardest to pass on. The gift of dragon dreams, though a peculiarity of House Targaryen, was not a blessing granted to all members of the lineage, and even for those who possessed it, the clarity and comprehension of the visions varied drastically. For Aegon, who had witnessed the horror of the Long Night with visceral clarity, the burden of transmitting this truth to his children was immense. He knew that Westeros' survival depended on his successors not only governing, but also understanding the threat he had foreseen. His son and heir, Aenys I, was a gentle, kind, and artistic man, but he lacked the toughness and resolve his father possessed. Aegon, in his later years, must have tried to impress upon Aenys the urgency of prophecy. He would have shared the details of his visions, the sun disappearing, the bone-chilling cold, the White Walkers. He would have spoken about the need to keep Westeros united and strong. However, Aenys' dreamy nature, his aversion to conflict, and his tendency to see the world through more poetic lenses prevented him from grasping the existential gravity of the Long Night. Aenys likely heard his father's words as distant tales, ancient legends, and not as an urgent warning. He may have had his own dreams, but they would be more fragmented, less clear, and without the same conviction that propelled Aegon. Aegon's frustration must have been profound upon realizing that the burden he carried was not being fully understood by his own son. The seed of prophecy was being planted, but in a soil that seemed not to absorb it with the necessary urgency. Aegon's second son, Maegor, born to his sister Visenya, was a stark contrast to Aenys. Maegor was a born warrior of brutal strength and boundless cruelty, who inherited his mother's ruthless nature. Aegon, in his desperate search for an heir capable of facing the Long Night, must have tried to instill in him the truth of the prophecy, perhaps hoping that his strength would be a useful tool against darkness. However, Maegor's cruelty and distorted pragmatism transformed any vision of prophecy into a pretext for tyranny, and not for salvation. Maegor saw power as an end in itself, and not as a means to a greater purpose. His interpretation of Targaryen strength was one of absolute domination, not protection. He used his dragons and his brutality to crush any opposition, but his actions were motivated by a desire for control and revenge, and not by preparation for a greater threat. The realm, under Maegor, lived under a regime of terror, and the unity Aegon had built with so much effort began to be based on fear, not loyalty. The vision of the Long Night, if Maegor understood it at all, was completely perverted by his nature. He saw no need to unite humanity against a common enemy, but rather to subjugate everyone for his own benefit. His actions, which culminated in a reign of terror, were not motivated by preparation for an external enemy, but by the consolidation of his own power. His reign was a stain on Targaryen history, and his madness and cruelty only weakened the realm, making it even more vulnerable to the true threat Aegon had foreseen. Aegon's prophecy, in Maegor's hands, became a tool of oppression, not salvation. The difficulty in transmitting Aegon's prophecy to his direct heirs, Aenys and Maegor, was not an isolated problem. The gift of dragon dreams, and the ability to interpret them, was something that varied drastically from generation to generation. Many Targaryens had dreams, but few understood them with Aegon's clarity and urgency. This variability led to a series of misunderstandings and a gradual loss of the prophecy's original focus. What for Aegon was a pressing threat, for some of his descendants became a distant legend, a mere family tale, or even an eccentric peculiarity. The absence of a unified understanding of prophecy led to a series of errors and tragedies throughout Targaryen history, for the House of the Dragon, though powerful, at times lost its greater purpose. The burden of knowing the truth about winter, but being unable to make it resonate with his successors, must have been Aegon's greatest sorrow. He had built a realm, but he could not instill in his heirs the same visceral understanding of the threat that motivated him. He watched his children and grandchildren, loving them, but also seeing them as perhaps unprepared for the true challenge Westeros would face, should the long night return in their reigns. Aegon died without the certainty that his vision would be fully understood and continued. Prophecy became, then, a complex and dangerous inheritance, a secret that, instead of uniting the dynasty around a purpose, at times, divided it or was distorted for personal gain. The seed of preparation had been planted, but the future of the tree was still uncertain, and winter awaited. The persistent shadow and the first signs, with the death of Aegon I, the Conqueror. The secret vision of the long night did not disappear, but cast a persistent shadow over the Targaryen dynasty. Through the generations that followed, the urgency of this prophecy, at times, was lost, obscured by court intrigues, wars of succession, and the complacency of an era of peace that did not recognize the true enemy. However, the threat did not sleep. It waited, sending subtle signs that few had the wisdom or the courage to interpret. After the tumultuous reigns of Aenys I and Maegor I, who did little to truly understand or adequately prepare for Aegon's vision, the realm found a period of stability and prosperity under Jaehaerys I, the Conciliator. His long reign of 5 decades was a golden age of just laws and a peace that extended throughout Westeros. In this time of abundance, the memory of the long night faded even further. Aegon's prophecy, which had been an urgent call to duty, became more of an old women's tale, a distant legend for entertainment. Dragons, though still existing in greater numbers during Jaehaerys' reign, were seen more as symbols of royalty and spectacle than as the crucial weapons against ice that Aegon had foreseen. The dynasty's direct connection to the original purpose of its existence weakened. The complacency of peace was a slow poison, causing the realm to forget history's most important lesson, that winter always returns, and with it, the creatures of darkness. Aegon's vision, then, was not effectively transmitted. The fragile link between dragon dreams and necessary action slowly broke. Prophecy became an object of academic curiosity for some maesters, but not a priority for kings. Aegon's burden of knowing the truth but seeing his realm forget it lingered as a silent reminder of the tragedy approaching. As Targaryen generations passed, the shadow of the long night, though ignored by most, began to send its first subtle signs. The cold in the north, already a constant, became more intense, and winters, longer and harsher. Ancient legends about ice creatures and reanimated dead began to resurface in folk tales, no longer as mere myths, but as something that awakened a primal fear in the hearts of commoners and the more experienced night's watchmen. Beyond the wall, the first indications of trouble began to appear. Night's Watch rangers venturing beyond the Great Barrier began to disappear without a trace, or returned dead, with blue eyes and a new terror in their souls. These events, though isolated, were the first whispers of the long night, the first steps of the White Walkers preparing for their return. However, The realm, immersed in its own internal disputes, in the succession of kings and in power intrigues, ignored these warnings. Deaths on the wall were attributed to wildlings or the cold. Complacency was widespread. The great houses were more concerned with their own dominions and the Iron Throne than with an ancient threat coming from wild lands. Aegon's vision, the Conqueror, had become a forgotten prophecy, and the realm was in great danger from its own ignorance. Targaryen history continued to unfold, with reigns marked by different challenges. The Dance of the Dragons, the brutal civil war that almost decimated the dynasty, was an event that tested House Targaryen like never before. Although not directly linked to the Long Night prophecy, the dance had a devastating impact on the realm's ability to prepare for it. The war led to the deaths of almost all dragons, the greatest Targaryen weapon against winter. Targaryen fire was extinguished, leaving the dynasty in Westeros vulnerable. Aerys to the Mad King's madness and his distortions of prophecy, transforming the search for dragons into an obsession with wildfire and destruction, were a tragic reflection of how Aegon's vision could be perverted. Aerys believed he himself was the purifying dragon, and his actions only weakened the realm Aegon had built. These events, the dance and Aerys' reign, were indirect consequences of forgetting Aegon's original prophecy. The realm focused on its own battles, and the true enemy was ignored. The shadow of the Long Night, however, persisted, awaiting its moment. Aegon's legacy, though monumental in its construction, was being corroded by his dynasty's own history. Aegon the Conqueror's secret vision had cast a long shadow over the Targaryen dynasty, influencing, distorting, and, at times, fulfilling its destiny through generations of kings and catastrophic events. But the longest shadow, the primordial threat, was still there, waiting for its true confrontation. In the next and final chapter of this saga, we will delve into the true fulfillment of the prophecy. You will understand how the Long Night finally manifests, how Aegon's heirs, Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen, find themselves forced to fulfill the burden he had foreseen centuries earlier. Prepare for the whispers of the final confrontation between ice and fire, the eternal legacy, the prophecy's fulfillment. Aegon I the Conqueror's secret vision, a chilling nightmare of a coming winter, had compelled his conquest and shaped his dynasty. Prophecy, a heavy burden passed down through generations of Targaryens, was at times forgotten, distorted, and ignored. But destiny, with its relentless patience, waited. The shadow of the Long Night loomed over Westeros, and House Targaryen, or what remained of it, would be forced to confront the primordial threat Aegon foresaw centuries earlier. The Long Night, the threat Aegon I had glimpsed with such horror, finally arrived in Westeros in the era of Game of Thrones events. It was not a distant whisper, but a physical and brutal manifestation of ice and death. The signs, once subtle, became unequivocal and terrifying. The cold deepened, winters stretched for years, and daily life became a struggle for survival against the unforgiving climate. Beyond the wall, the nightmare materialized. The disappearances of rangers and wildlings became alarming. The legends of the White Walkers and their armies of the dead, the Whites, transformed into a cold and frightening reality. The wall, the great barrier of ice and magic Aegon had built to deter the threat, was finally breached, not by armies of men, but by a dragon reanimated by the White Walkers, symbolizing the ultimate failure of purely physical defenses and the invasion of the supernatural. Westeros, despite all of Aegon's efforts to unite it, was tragically unprepared. The realm was fragmented by its own internal wars, by the War of the Five Kings, by political intrigues, and distrust among the great houses. Belief in the Long Night had been ridiculed for centuries, and Aegon's knowledge had been forgotten by most. Lords and petty kings warred for an Iron Throne, oblivious to the existential threat approaching from the north. proving that ignorance and division were Westeros' greatest weaknesses. Amidst the chaos and despair, the true heirs of Aegon's vision would emerge, those destined to carry the burden of prophecy and face the long night. Jon Snow, with his ice and fire blood, secret son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, represented the union of lineages Aegon had foreseen as essential. His journey as a Night's Watchman, his leadership in the fight against the White Walkers, and his dedication to duty above power made him a symbol of hope for the living. His own death and rebirth echoed the legends of Azor Ahai, Daenerys Targaryen, the last Targaryen and the mother of dragons, brought fire back to the world with her dragons. For Aegon, dragons were the ultimate weapon against the long night, and Daenerys wielded them. Her belief in breaking the wheel and uniting Westeros, though with different motivations than Aegon's, echoed the Conqueror's original vision of a cohesive realm. Her arrival in Westeros with her dragons forced the realm to confront the reality of magic and the supernatural, which many had forgotten. The alliance between Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen was the fulfillment of Aegon's vision of 3 heads of the dragon united against winter. They, along with her dragon Viserion, reanimated by the White Walkers becoming an ice dragon of death, represented the final union of ice and fire, the forces necessary to combat the White Walkers. Their choices, their sacrifices, and their leadership were the culmination of a prophecy that had guided the Targaryen dynasty for centuries. The battle for Dawn was no longer a legend, but a reality, and Aegon's heirs were there to face it, a tribute to his vision. The Great War against the White Walkers was Westeros' final test, the confrontation for which Aegon had tried to prepare the realm. The battle was an absolute horror, a clash between life and death, with unimaginable costs. Thousands of lives were lost, battlefields became icy cemeteries, and despair threatened to consume the hearts of the living. The army of the dead was relentless, an unending wave of terror that seemed to have no end. However, victory came in a way many did not expect, and that defied the more literal interpretations of prophecy. Arya Stark, the young assassin, in an act of skill and destiny, emerged as the unexpected savior. She killed the Night King, the leader of the White Walkers, ending the threat of the long night. Her action, though not directly linked to classic Azor Ahai and Lightbringer prophecies, was the culmination of the struggle and the guarantee of humanity's survival. Prophecy was fulfilled, but perhaps not in the heroic and epic way Aegon or Rhaegar had imagined, demonstrating the treacherous nature of destiny and the importance of free will and individual action. Victory came at a terrible price. The realm was broken, wounded, but free from the primordial threat. Losses were immense, and devastation widespread. Survivors carried the scars of war, but also the lesson that unity was key. Humanity had won, but the cost was high, and Westeros' future would be shaped by this bittersweet victory, a testament to Aegon's burden. Aegon I the Conqueror's legacy and his secret vision of winter are the true heart of the Targaryen saga. He was not just an ambitious king, but a man tormented by a prophecy, who sacrificed much to forge a realm capable of withstanding an existential threat. His act of unification, though brutal, sowed the seeds for Westeros' eventual survival. The long night prophecy, which he foresaw, and which passed through generations of interpretation, distortion, and forgetfulness, finally manifested, and his heirs, Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen, found themselves compelled to fulfill the burden Aegon had envisioned centuries earlier. Westeros' destiny, in its essence, is the story of the battle against the long night, and Aegon's vision was the first chapter of this epic. Prophecy is not just a story, but a warning, a reminder that, despite all human wars and intrigues, there is a greater darkness, an enemy for which Westeros must always be vigilant. Aegon's legacy is a testament to the importance of looking beyond the immediate horizon, of preparing for the inevitable, and of how one man's vision can shape the destiny. of a continent. He united the realms for a war he would not see, and left the inheritance of fighting to his descendants.